Ohio is rich with tales of haunted places and legends of those who haunt them. Javier, where's the spookiest place you've ever been in Ohio?
For me, it was the Haunted Forest in Pataskala. Went there once, never went back again.
Which is why I've never gone.
Right, what about you?
For me, it would probably be the Kelton House, which is supposed to be haunted.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also venture to say that cemeteries probably have some spooky stories.
You are probably right about that, Javier. Next, we follow a unique trolley tour through Greenlawn Cemetery, where historians shared the ghostly and ghastly tales of people who are buried there.
Welcome to Greenlawn Cemetery. For those of you that aren't aware, this is the second largest cemetery in the state of Ohio. It spans 360 acres and contains 155,000 interments. This cemetery was created in part as a response to a pandemic. In the early days in American cities, we usually buried our dead in urban graveyards, normally churchyards, that sort of thing. As the Industrial Revolution happened, people started moving from the farms to the cities to take factory jobs, and the cities grew and enclosed these urban burial grounds. And the population increase led to a spread of infectious disease that overcrowded these confined cemeteries. And there was some belief that the graveyards and their proximity to drinking wells was helping spread cholera and other infectious disease. So in 1848, they founded Greenlawn Cemetery, and the process of digging up the dead and moving them out to the country began in what was called the Rural Cemetery Movement. Tonight, what we're going to be doing is talking about not so much the famous people, but some of the more unquiet dead of Greenlawn Cemetery. All right. Thanks. In early days, we buried our dead in urban burial grounds, and most of them were dug up and moved out here. About 86 of the graves at this site were originally at Fort Hays campus, the military barracks that's just northeast of downtown Columbus. And they were moved here in 1896. More than a few of these soldiers died in battle violently. There was one that was murdered, and there were also quite a few that committed suicide, probably suffering from what we'd prescribe as PTSD nowadays. One example of that is this grave right here, a guy named Paul Neupert. He was born in Germany in 1852, and he immigrated to America as a young man and enlisted with an infantry out of San Antonio, Texas, when he was 23 years old. He completed 15 years honorable service there, and after he was done, he signed up at Fort Hays, and he got here, and he wasn't here very long before he was given orders to return to San Antonio, and he did not want to go at all. Just a few days before he was due to ship out, he went into a chemist and purchased some rat poison that was arsenic-based, and he went into the basement of the main building on Fort Hays campus and mixed up a big bowl and drank it before anybody had a chance to stop him. And as his fellow soldiers rushed to his aid, he gasped with his last breaths, "If this rat poison doesn't kill me, I've got a gun that'll finish the job, anything but Texas." He clearly was someone who wanted to linger at Fort Hays campus, and perhaps he does. And he got his wish. He's still here in Ohio. He didn't have to go back to Texas. All right, let's move to our next resident. Right this way. So one thing I had to contend with when setting up these cemetery tours is why would anybody haunt a cemetery per se? Most people, skeptics, even ghost hunters believe that these are the least haunted places on the planet. If you're going to haunt someplace, wouldn't you haunt where you lived, where you loved, where you worked, where you died, not just where you're buried? There's no attachment to these places. Well, I would argue that these are actually places that have quite a bit of emotional attachment. They're specifically designed for us to gather here and express really intense human emotions, whether it be joy, sometimes sorrow, grief, guilt, happiness. That, I think, can inform a haunting, and these are also places that we commit to the earth our entire worlds. A good example of how that sort of attachment can leave a mark on a place. We're standing here at the grave of George Wagner and his daughter Eva. Eva Wagner died in 1880 at the age of 23 from tuberculosis. And she was her father George's favorite child. And he would basically come here every Sunday and weep and moan and cry at her grave here and have a very Victorian case of melancholia. And this continued for 3 years. And on the 3rd anniversary of Eva's death, George said farewell to the family. I'm off to Green Lawn to pay my respects to Eva. And he came here and he spent the day here at the grave crying and moaning. And as the sun set, he didn't go home that night as he normally would do. Instead, he hid himself in the bushes and he waited until the cemetery workers locked up and left for the night. And then he emerged from his hiding place and he came here and he knelt down and he pulled a revolver out of his pocket and held it to his right temple and he pulled the trigger. And a bullet entered his skull but not his brain. It went behind his right eye and caused it to bulge out. And he was blinded partially, and in the darkness he groped around here and found the gun with his left hand. He held it to his left ear and pulled the trigger, and again the bullet entered his skull but not his brain. It went in a downward trajectory, knocking out a bunch of his teeth and lodging somewhere near his carotid artery. He spent the next 12 hours that evening crawling along this ridgeline through the tombstones slicked in his own blood. And whenever the cemetery workers came to open the next morning, they found this man crumpled on the grass, laying in a puddle of crimson, and they ran up and they flipped him over, fearing the worst, but he was still conscious, believe it or not. And he kept mumbling over and over in his native German, "Ich will meine Waffe," I want my gun. As they were preparing him for the ambulance ride, they found basically a suicide note in his pocket that said, "I've been so heartbroken and distraught over the loss of my beloved Eva all these years, but a solution to my pain hasn't really made itself clear to me until earlier this week I met a man that put something of evil in my head that let me know what I had to do." Wagner actually survived the suicide attempt. This was in 1883, a pre-antibiotic world. He was a rather frail 63-year-old. He shot himself twice in the head, spent 12 hours rolling around through the mud and the dirt with these bullet wounds, and did not get an infection. He did successfully commit suicide the next year on the 4th anniversary of Eva's death. He threw himself in a canal in the Brewery District and drowned, and is now reunited with her here. On your right, James Fairchild Baldwin, MD. You can see through the trees there. The headstone actually reads, "Malus mors abducit non bonus," which is Latin, "From evil death removes us, never from beauty," which is kind of a pessimistic worldview in my opinion. Baldwin was a very respected physician here in Columbus during his lifetime. He was the one that founded Grant Hospital. In 1936, on his deathbed, he began writing his memoirs, and after he passed away, his family and friends were shocked when they began reading and came across a passage where he described, despite all his accolades in his life, the most exciting moments of his lifetime were when he would have to sneak into the cemetery at night with his students and keep watch while they procured specimens. He was a grave robber. This was a fairly common thing in Ohio during the 1800s because there were a lot of medical colleges here, and the best way to teach was to show, and very few people would donate their bodies to science for religious purposes back then. We'll be addressing grave robbing a little bit more later in the evening. Fort Hays is a notoriously haunted location. One of the most often repeated stories is one about a young cadet named Nicholas Hartzell who was in love with his commanding officer's daughter. And the commanding officer felt that Hartzell was way beneath her and that he forbid the relationship from happening, but you know, young love finds a way, and the courtship continued until April 29th, 1865. That was the date that Abraham Lincoln's body was brought to Columbus to lie in state in the Ohio Capitol building for an afternoon so people could pay their respects to the fallen president. Also on that day, it was said that they were firing off cannons every 15 minutes at Fort Hays to honor Lincoln. And on that afternoon, the commanding officer noticed that one of the cannons was starting to overheat, and he looked at the cannon, and he looked at Hartzell, and he looked at the cannon, and he looked at Hartzell and said, "Cadet, you're on this cannon." And when he went to detonate the device, it backfired and he was killed instantly. This story holds that this cadet, Hartzell, is a ghost is seen climbing the shot tower sometimes. He's said to be responsible for the locker doors opening and slamming shut and all sorts of poltergeist activity. The interesting thing about this story is it's not true. It's all pretty much urban legend. The basis for it is buried right here. His name is Nicholas Katzell, not Hartzell, and he was not a young man. He was 50 years old. He was married, had a wife, Margaret, and a son, Frederick, at the time of his death. And he was a private citizen. He happened to be at Fort Hays on April 5th, 1865. Richmond had just fallen, signifying that the northern states had won the American Civil War. And they're celebrating, having a big party, and they shot off a cannon, and he accidentally had gotten away. So it's kind of, intriguing that there's a little kernel of truth to this, but over the 160 years this telephone game has been played. With that, we're not too far away from our next story. It's just a few steps this way. This section of the cemetery is home to probably the most chilling story that we know of in Greenlawn's history. It was May 19th, 1872. A man was walking through this area one evening when he heard a blood-curdling scream. He looked around, but there was no other person there. He was so terrified by this, he ran to the cemetery superintendent's house, and he told him what he'd heard. And the superintendent, Mr. Stevens, said, "Well, do you have a moment? Can you walk with me and show me where you think this scream came from?" And they came over here and found the cause. So this is the plot for the Althouse family. On May 18th, 1872, they had a son, 20-year-old William Althouse, who died of smallpox. And because it was an infectious disease, he was buried almost immediately the very next day. And also because it was an infectious disease that killed him, they placed him in what was called a Fisk casket. And these are cast iron, hermetically sealed sarcophagi. And the idea was that they wouldn't allow the disease to contaminate the groundwater. Now, another feature of Fisk caskets, they had glass faceplates, viewing windows, so you could say farewell to your loved one without any chance of contracting what killed them. Now, one advantage to these glass faceplates, it was thought that if the person wasn't quite dead yet, you'd know it by the condensation that would form around their nose and mouth from breathing. Well, that's how they buried William Althouse that Sunday in 1872. And because it was a Sunday in 1872 in Columbus, Ohio, it was the Lord's Day, typical practice was to just throw a few inches of dirt over the coffin and then come in on the following Monday and fill it in. Well, whenever Mr. Stevens and the witness to the scream arrived here, they found William Althouse's faceplate had been shattered. His face was cut to ribbons, his suit had been torn to shreds. William Althouse had been buried alive. He had come to in his grave and believed himself to be all the way 6 feet under when he was actually under just a little bit. Probably died of a heart attack, and if he had kept his composure, could have survived. I would like to introduce you to Rogers, the Greenlawn grave digger.
Welcome, welcome. Follow me to a grave. The year is 1859, and 23-year-old Paulus Ruprecht, a young man of German descent, is out with his friends for a night on the town. They visit several saloons and inns and the theater, and by their own admission, become very intoxicated. As the night gets long, his friends suggest maybe it's time to go home. But Paulus has other ideas. And in a fairly immature and certainly derogatory manner, he suggests that instead they go to his farm. His farm was the name he had for a building that we know as the Jury Room Tavern. It was a house of ill repute, and he had become enamored with the girl who worked there. So he drags his friends along, goes up to the door, it's closed, the lights are out, and he starts beating on the door demanding entry. The madam of the house is Frances Miller. Now, Frances may not have been the nicest person, we don't know. She was certainly part of the criminal underbelly of Columbus, but she probably wasn't what the press immediately described her as, the old hag. But the old hag explained that they were closed and that he would have to come back the next day. Paulus insisted. He started banging on the door, threatening he would beat the door down and come in by force. So Frances grabbed 2 pistols. One pistol she didn't load. She just put a cap on it. So when she pulled the trigger, the cap would explode and make a loud bang, but no one would get hurt. There was no bullet to go out. The other pistol was loaded. After a few minutes, he starts to, according to the testimony of his friends, give up and takes a few steps away from the door, but the damage has already been done. Frances is afraid that they're going to break in. She points the empty pistol at them and pulls the trigger. There's a loud bang, which summons a couple of nearby police officers, but it does not scare away Paulus. In fact, he re-engages, but he was shot by the loaded pistol. He took several steps towards the street, collapsed, and fairly quickly died. Frances Miller, fortunately, she gets sent to a friendlier judge in town, and he does find her guilty of manslaughter, and she's sent to prison for 11 years. But now we have stories from the jury room that there is a ghost that lingers in the building, and it's a boisterous, violent ghost. And people immediately associate that with young Paulus Ruprecht, because surely he has some resentment that he was cut down so early in life, and certainly when he was shot, he was behaving quite badly. But I always wonder if maybe it's not Paulus who would have reason to haunt the jury room. The person who left prison a broken woman, having lost everything she had, and who disappears from history, is Frances Miller. And perhaps it's her resentment that lingers in that building. You can actually stay there as an Airbnb, and you may be tempted to court favor of this violent ghost, and maybe you make a toast to Paulus Ruprecht. I think Paulus would probably appreciate that, but while you're at it, I would suggest that maybe you should toast the old hag and curry her favor as well.
The old hag.
Now, I think I have one more grave that will fit all of you. I mean, that you would all like to see. Join me. Welcome to the alleged grave of Mr. Isaiah Voorhees. Isaiah was a soldier during the Revolutionary War from New Jersey. After the war, he moved to Pennsylvania and finally to Columbus before Columbus was actually a city. In fact, he's one of the guys who diagrammed the first lot for the city of Columbus. So he's literally one of our city's founding fathers. He started a tavern on Gift Street. That was in 1808. In the 1810s, he starts a second tavern in German Village, the White Horse Tavern. In 1834, he dies, and according to our records, he dies of a palsy, or a paralysis of the brain. So in 1834, he's buried in the Old North Graveyard. 1848, Greenlawn Cemetery is formed, and we open in 1849, and families immediately start bringing their loved ones and friends to Greenlawn from the North Cemetery. Isaiah's friends bring him to their lot, and they bury him. And that's when the conspiracy theories start. Because when they dig up Isaiah, who had been buried for 25 years at this point, not everyone could agree that the corpse in the casket looked like Isaiah. Now again, he'd been in the ground for 25 years, but the other piece that concerned them was that the corpse they dug up, the skull was crushed. Now he died of this palsy, this paralysis. It's possible that that was caused by an accident or a fall that broke his skull. But of course, everyone jumped to the conclusion that the person in the casket that may or may not look like Isaiah had been a victim of foul play and had been bludgeoned to death. Then the conspiracy theory grew. Why is someone who doesn't look like Isaiah in his grave? Well, it was pretty common during that time for grave robbers plaguing our Central Ohio cemeteries. The cadavers would go to the medical colleges, and this was the only way that the students in the medical schools would get cadavers to practice on. So sometimes this practice was even given a bit of a wink and a nod. So the theory was that Isaiah's body had gone to the medical school from the grave robbers, but they also had another body of someone that had been murdered that they needed to hide, because if that body went to the school, the nature of the death might cause questions to be asked. So they dumped the body they needed to hide in his grave. 25 years later, that's the body that comes here to Greenlawn Cemetery. I suspect that what we have here is Isaiah Voorhees. Greenlawn always had the reputation of not suffering from the grave robbers. When the cemetery was designed, it was designed with the superintendent's house on site, and he lived here with his family. Also, throughout the 1800s, we have accounts of night watchmen, security, and even cemetery police. Today, we continue to try to protect Greenlawn Cemetery, and in fact, in the evenings here, you will find us haunted by the officers of the Greenlawn Cemetery Police.
For our next story, we are joined by Doreen Uhaus-Sauer with Greenlawn Cemetery.
Good evening. We're standing by the Kelton marker, which is right here. You might notice the top of the obelisk, and it looks like it was carved to be like a cloth of some sort with tassels hanging down. But if you actually look at those tassels, you see that they also look like the symbols of antiquity of the torch turned upside down, which means the moment of death, its extinction, is sudden and swift and unpredictable. And there's something about that that's very fitting for the Keltons, because the Kelton house is one of the most haunted houses in Columbus. Oscar Kelton. As a young man, he decides to join the Union Army, perhaps without the actual approval of his parents. Oscar enlists in Company A of the 95th Regiment. He sees action in Tennessee, but it's in Mississippi where he meets his fate. He dies in battle. His comrades bury him near the site, and his body remains there in Mississippi. Almost 2 years later, Fernando Cortez Kelton will go to Mississippi and will find the body and bring it back to Columbus, and on the way suffers a wagon accident which will eventually lead to his own demise. So Oscar seems to be one of the ghosts that is in the Kelton house. Interestingly, he's rarely seen inside the house. He's wearing a Civil War uniform, a Union uniform, but he always seems to be seen outside as if he's looking through the window, like he's really not part of the family anymore. There's always been a mystery, however, that there is a different presence in the house. And a former employee of Ohio Historical Society went up to the attic once to participate in a children's Halloween party. He lasted only a few seconds, came running down the stairs, and wound up in the front yard saying, "I will never go in that house again. There is something dark and forbidding and brooding in the house." And so we're left with, well, who could that be? And as we learn more about Greenlawn and we learn about the interconnectedness of families, it turns out that Oscar and some of his other young comrades were really sent into battle as new young raw recruits, while their commander, who was also from a prominent Columbus family, was safely behind lines drunk as a skunk, commanding no one, could not even have appeared on the battlefield. So I sometimes wonder if it wasn't Fernando who, after the grief was gone of burying his son, that he thought more and more about where the blame was really to lie, and that may be the dark presence. So I leave the mystery to you, and glad you could stop by tonight.
So this is Huntington Chapel. This was built in 1902. This addition was added in the 1970s. No matter whether or not you believe in ghosts, there's no denying the existence of ghost stories. And aside from their entertainment value, they can lead to some very meaningful connections between the past and the present. Such was the case with a man named James Eldridge, who was a political commentator and a radio personality in Columbus in the mid-1970s. He had a radio show on a station, WMNI, which at that time broadcast from the 7th floor, the top floor of the Westin or Great Southern Hotel. Incidentally, Eldridge lived on the 6th floor. And in mid-March 1978, he failed to show up one day for a recording of his program. The radio station owner, who also actually owned the hotel, ran down to Eldridge's room to check in on him and found that he had been brutally murdered. In the homicide investigation that followed, it was revealed that Eldridge was a gay man and he had been killed during a tryst gone horribly, horribly awry. Because of that, in 1970s Columbus, his cremated remains were never claimed, and they were left in a storage unit for 40 years. But at the hotel over those 40 years, guests would complain about very loud music coming from the 7th floor in the middle of the night. One person who had heard this ghost story prompted their friend, journalist Bob Vitale, to write a piece on the life and death of James Eldredge, and he did so in 2021 for Columbus Monthly magazine, and it got a lot of attention. And after that, an effort was organized to raise funds so Eldredge could have a proper burial, and he is right up here at the top with a plaque that reads, "I hated his guts, but I read him twice a week." It was his favorite critique in life that he had received from a patron. So this is just an example of how these ghost stories can have a connection in modern times. So the next time you hear someone spinning one of these yarns, rather than discount it, I encourage you to stop, listen, lean in. You never know where the story can lead you. Thank you all for coming on the tour tonight. I hope you appreciated this visit to Green Lawn Cemetery. And now, like the 155,000 people around us, I would say our time is up.